We've been talking with Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, for the last 45 minutes. As always, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, the House of Representatives is coming into session at this moment. The Senate will be in at 9:30, and you can watch that. It's on C-SPAN 2. The Senate will be debating the continuing resolution.
House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., September 27, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Ted Poe to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be Chaplain Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We pause in your presence and ask guidance for the men and women of the people's house. Enable them, O God, to act on what they believe to be right and true and just, and to do so in ways that show respect for those with whom they disagree. May their actions in these coming days prove to be of heroic importance and benefit to our nation and its people. Bless us this day and every day, and may all that is done be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under Clause 5D of Rule 20, the Chair announces to the House that in light of the resignation of the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Alexander, the whole number of the House is 432. The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, while our nation benefits from great wealth, often we become disconnected from just what it takes to power a great nation. Standards of living that are accustomed to many in the developed world, including flipping a switch and having the lights turn on, or with the turn of a dial having a machine to do household laundry. These things aren't easily accessed by most of the planet. We've become accustomed to these day-to-day activities, but to have lights and power, America needs both affordable and reliable electricity. The fact is, much of this electricity is generated from coal. Despite some of the most abundant domestic energy resources, we are in denial. Mr. Speaker, we are in denial of the fact that we must produce energy to actually consume it. This disconnect from reality leaves the world's largest consumer of energy with no plan to power the largest economy in the world. The EPA's new source performance standard for coal power plants is a misguided pursuit that jeopardizes the economic security of our country. It's a direct threat to the American consumer, affordable electricity, and the economic security of Pennsylvania and the nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
We stand here today on the brink of a threatened shutdown of the federal government, bad enough. Or worse, a refusal to pay the bills of the United States of America. These are completely unnecessary Republican-manufactured crises. Hal Rogers, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, said a government shutdown is a political game in which everyone loses. Karl Rove said a shutdown now would have much worse fallout than in 1995. It is an ill-conceived tactic, and Republicans should reject it. In a moment of clarity, Senator Mike Lee, one of the senators holding up the bill in the Senate, said shutdowns are bad, shutdowns are not worth it. This law, Obamacare, is not worth causing a shutdown over. A default, this is Senator Jud Gregg, former senator, a default would lead to some level of chaos in the debt markets, would lead to a significant contraction in economic activity would lead to job losses, would lead to higher spending by the federal government, lower tax revenues, and would lead to more debt. And perhaps most important to my Republican colleagues, this is from the Wall Street Journal. Some Republicans think they are sure to hold the House in 2014. The kamikazes could end up ensuring the return of all Democratic rule. And I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Staff Sergeant Timothy Raymond McGill, a member of the Rhode Island National Guard who was killed in combat last Saturday while serving as a member of the United States Army's Elite Special Forces Unit in Afghanistan. A lifelong resident of New Jersey, Staff Sergeant McGill enlisted in the Marine Corps immediately after high school and was still training in boot camp when terrorists struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. After serving in Iraq, he joined the Rhode Island National Guard as an anti-Army specialist and just 2 years ago became a weapons sergeant with the Army Special Forces, the Green Berets. Americans are blessed to live in a free and democratic society because of the heroic efforts and brave sacrifices of our men and women in uniform, and owe an especially profound debt of gratitude to those like Timothy who have made the ultimate sacrifice. We express our sincere condolences to Timothy's father, Raymond, his mother, Carol, and his two sisters, Megan and Lindsay, and I pray that they find some small measure of comfort in knowing that an entire nation is deeply grateful and shall keep them in our thoughts and prayers. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize students from my district who demonstrated excellence and technical, academic, and employability skills at the Skills USA National Leadership and Skills Conference held this past June in Kansas City, Missouri. The Skills USA Conference brings together high school students, college students, and teachers with industry experts to participate in contests that demonstrate their abilities in technical, business and criminal justice, culinary arts, and many more fields. Students from the Weber Institute in Stockton received the gold medal for their project in human services, and students from the Bear Creek High School in Stockton, California received the bronze medal for their project in health services. These students have proven that they will not only be successful in their future careers, but they will excel and be leaders in their fields. I urge my colleagues to join me in congratulating these young adults on their academic achievements and to recognize the importance of the Skills USA Conference. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend these remarks.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address an impending problem, which is the increase of insurance premiums in South Florida and throughout our country. The Biggers Waters Act of 2012 will burden many homeowners with flood insurance increases of up to 25% for years to come. Congress must act to reverse these increases and ensure they do not undermine our housing market. Mr. Speaker, this is a national problem. This act was passed before I came to office, but affects my constituents and the nation as a whole and seriously threatens our economic recovery. There is already a bill that can delay these increases and gives us time to work on this problem. Let's act now. Mr. Speaker, this is neither a Democratic problem nor a Republican problem. This is a national problem. Perhaps if we work on real problems as opposed to ideological problems, we can find the common ground that all Americans wish us to work on. I urge my colleagues in joining me in protecting our hardworking homeowners, in creating a common-sense solution that addresses this crisis. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, please.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, sir. I rise today to talk about the impact of the ongoing budget debates in Washington and how they are affecting the hardworking people that I'm honored to serve in Illinois. Last November, the people of the 17th District of Illinois elected me because they were sick and tired of the partisan gridlock in Congress. I spent the short time here in Congress working across the aisle to find common-sense solutions to the problems facing our nation. But too many in Washington have the wrong priorities, putting politics over people. Let me just offer one example. During the last month, I have visited Head Start programs throughout my district. Head Start, as you may know, provides early childhood education and is an important down payment on our region's economic well-being. In fact, for every dollar invested in Head Start, we get a $7 to $9 return. But due to short-sighted cuts, needy children and families are being turned away at the door. In the region I serve, there are literally hundreds of children waiting to be enrolled in Head Start while dedicated staff members continue to have to cut back. This is unacceptable. I'm willing to work with those who I disagree with and who disagree with me to find reasonable solutions that put people before politics. Let's find solutions that put Americans first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back her time. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6, Rule 20. Recorded votes will be postponed on questions will be taken later. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 1412, the Department of Veterans Affairs Expiring Authorities Act of 2013.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1412, an act to improve and increase the availability of on-job training and apprenticeship programs carried out by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and for other purposes. Senate amendments.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Brown, will each control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Senate amendment we are discussing today to H.R. 1412 would extend a number of expiring authorities affecting the daily lives and long-term well-being of our service members, veterans, and their families. The important initiatives that would be extended through this legislation include those that provide adaptive sports programs, specially adapted housing grants for disabled veterans, and supported services such as housing and employment assistance for homeless veterans. The bill would also extend for 1 year the Department's authority to provide child care assistance to certain veterans receiving intensive health care services. Now further, it would extend VA's authority to collect co-payments for hospital and nursing home care and to recover from third parties the cost of care and services that are furnished to veterans with health plan contracts for non-service connected conditions through September 30 of 2014. Now, needless to say, each of these programs is critical to ensuring the efficient and the effective delivery of high-quality health care and benefits to veterans and communities across our great country. The committee will continue to be vigorous in our oversight of each of these programs to ensure the prompt delivery of needed benefits and services to veterans and the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars. Now, this legislation represents a bipartisan, bicameral effort, and I want to express my gratitude to the ranking member, Mr. Michaud, and to Ms. Brown, who is here with us on the floor today, the chairman and the ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committees, Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Richard Burr of North Carolina, for their hard work and their leadership in this effort. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks on Senate Amendment H.R. 1412.
Without objection.
And with that, I urge all of my colleagues to join me in support of the Senate Amendment to H.R. 1412 and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1412 as amended, the Department of Veterans Affairs Expired Authority Act of 2013. VA would lose the authority to continue a number of critical programs that, without action, would expire next week. These programs assist our most vulnerable veterans' reintegration back into society and into their communities. With this legislation, wrap-around services for homeless veterans and their families would be authorized to continue. Services such as counseling, job training, job referrals, financial assistance, case management, housing, and special needs for the frail, elderly, and seriously mentally ill veterans will continue. We listened to veterans when they told us that they were busy with jobs, school, and family. As a result, found it difficult to get the health care they need without child care assistance. This measure extended for 1 year VA authority to provide child care assistance for certain veterans receiving intensive health care services. This bill would extend the authority to provide monthly assistance allowances to veterans with disabilities who are invited by the U.S. Olympic Committee to participate in the U.S. Paralympic teams. More than 14,000 veterans with disabilities have benefited from these activities. The results of these veterans athletes have been astonishing in both the teams and the athletic accomplishments and personal accomplishments. This bill extends eligibility for special adapted housing for most disabled veterans. It would allow them to live more independent in their daily lives. Mr. Speaker, I believe we have a moral obligation to ensure that we do what we need to be done to help those who've worn the uniform receive the benefits and services they have earned. These extensions are critical programs we're considering today and will help us do all we can. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield time to a gentleman who has worn the uniform of this country and served this country well. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Mashad for working with the members of the House and Senate Veterans Affairs committees to pass this important legislation. Specifically, I'm happy to see that the extension of the Veterans Paralympic program, which reflects my legislation, H.R. 1402, the Veterans Paralympic Act, which passed unanimously out of the Economic Opportunities Subcommittee before being combined in an omnibus bill in the full committee. This program ensures that disabled veterans and local communities throughout the country continue to have opportunities for rehabilitation, stress relief, and higher achievement through adaptive sports. The U.S. Olympic Committee's Paralympics chief, Charlie Hubner, testified at a hearing that participation in sports and other athletic activities can help speed the rehabilitation process for disabled veterans. As a Marine Corps combat veteran, I couldn't agree more with Mr. Hubner, and I personally understand the importance of rehabilitation opportunities for returning veterans. Finally, although I fully support the passage of the extenders package, I am disappointed that the substance of H.R. 1412 was not included in this bill. H.R. 1412, the Improving Job Opportunities for Veterans Act, seeks to build on an existing yet little known and underutilized on-the-job training program that assists veterans by allowing them to use their educational benefits to learn a trade or skill by participating in an approved apprenticeship or on-the-job training program. Employers in my district have expressed their desire to work with this program and hire more veterans because they know how valuable a veteran can be to their organization. Additionally, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America has endorsed the legislation by saying IAVA stands ready to support and promote innovative ideas like this to end the veterans' unemployment crisis. It is my understanding that the original provision of H.R. 1412 were dropped without prejudice and that they will be part of an upcoming negotiation between the House and the Senate. I look forward to seeing the substance of that legislation advance, and I will be working with Chairman Miller to ensure that happens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentlelady from Florida.
Reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves.
Mr. Speaker, we have no more speakers at this time, so we are prepared to close.
Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues to support H.R. 1412 as amended, and I yield back the balance of my time. And I want to thank Chairman Miller for working in a very bipartisan way for veterans.
Gentlelady from Florida yields back her time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I, too, thank my colleague, Ms. Brown from Jacksonville, for her hard work on behalf of veterans and her ability to work with us in the committee in a bipartisan fashion. I once again encourage all members to support this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time, all time being yielded back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendments to H.R. 1412? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. After a sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2251 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
House Calendar Number 59, H.R. 2251, a bill to designate the United States Courthouse located at 118 South Mill Street in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, as the Edward J. Davitt United States Courthouse.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, and the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Carson, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 2251 as amended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 2251 as amended would designate the United States Courthouse and Federal Building located at 118 South Mill Street in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, as the Edward J. Davitt United States Courthouse and Federal Building. Judge Davitt attended the University of North Dakota. Early in his career, he served as judge on the Minnesota Municipal Court and as Assistant Attorney General for Minnesota. During World War II, he was a lieutenant commander in the United States Naval Reserve. Judge Davitt later became a United States representative for Minnesota. And in 1954, Judge Davitt was appointed to the United States District Court for the District of Minnesota and served as the chief judge from 1959 to 1981. I think it is appropriate to honor the work of Judge Davitt by naming this courthouse and federal building after him. I support passage of this legislation. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended, H.R. 2251.
The gentleman is recognized for 20 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 2251, which names the federal building and courthouse in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, after federal Judge Edward Davitt. Judge Davitt was a former member of Congress, World War II veteran, and municipal judge. Judge Davitt received a Bachelor of Science and Law degree from the University of North Dakota in 1932 and 1935, respectively. Upon graduation, Judge Davitt went into private practice as a lawyer and was later elected as the municipal judge in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, becoming one of the youngest judges in the nation at that time. He then went on to serve as an assistant attorney general for the state of Minnesota in 1939. During World War II, Judge Devitt served as a lieutenant commander to the 7th Fleet in U.S. Navy intelligence. After his World War II service, Judge Devitt successfully won election to the U.S. House of Representatives in the 80th Congress. After serving one term in Congress, Judge Devitt returned to private practice for 1 year before serving as a probate judge in Ramsey County, Minnesota. Judge Devitt became a U.S. District Judge in the District of Minnesota in 1955 after being nominated by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Then joining the federal bench, Judge Devitt went on to serve as Chief Judge from 1959 to 1981. During his lengthy tenure on the U.S. District Court, he became one of the most respected district judges in the nation. His decisions were seldom reversed on appeal. He was known for spearheading efforts to balance the demands of free press access to courts with the needs of courtroom proceedings. To honor his achievements, we are nominating him for his distinguished service and giving him the Justice Award, which is annually given to a federal judge who has made significant contributions, Mr. Speaker, to the administration of justice, the advancement of the rule of law, and the improvement of society as a whole. The designation of the United States Courthouse as the Edward J. Devitt Courthouse and Federal Building is yet another fitting tribute, Mr. Speaker, to this judge's outstanding public service career. I urge my colleagues to approve this important piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize Mr. Peters at this time.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for how much time?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, sir.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor a great Minnesotan, the Honorable Edward James Devitt, and to support my legislation, H.R. 2251. The federal court's presence in Fergus Falls continues to be an integral part of our nation's unwavering principles, providing equal access to justice. The federal court that resides in the federal building in Fergus Falls serves the needs of the citizens of west central Minnesota and the surrounding region. Serves a population of over 610,000 people and covers over 25,000 square miles. And serves the cities of Fergus Falls, Moorhead, East Grand Forks, Bemidji, as well as the Red Lake and White Earth Indian reservations. Naming the building the Edward J. Devitt United States Courthouse and Federal Building will give a great honor to distinguished jurist Judge Devitt as a much-deserved recognition. Before he was judge, he served one term in Congress, as was noted. He was elected in 1946, and as a freshman in the 80th Congress, his classmates included John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon. He was also defeated in the end of that term by another famous Minnesotan, Eugene McCarthy. No judge in recent past is more closely linked to the history of the Fergus Falls Courthouse than Judge Devitt. During his many years of service on the federal bench, he presided over numerous cases in the Fergus Falls Courthouse. Devitt was appointed by President Eisenhower to the U.S. District Court from Minnesota in 1955, and then in 1959 he was named Chief Judge for the Minnesota District, where he held that position until 1981. He served on the federal bench for 38 years. I'd like to submit the following statement without objection for the record, written by Mr. Thomas Boyd, who wrote this brief but detailed biography of the Honorable Edward J. Devitt. Without
objection, so ordered.
So again, Mr. Speaker, I strongly support this bill and urge my colleagues to support it as well. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Indiana reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Continues to reserve. The gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker,
from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time having been yielded back, the question is on, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2251 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3096.
Clerk, report the title of the bill.
House Calendar Number 60, H.R. 3096, a bill to designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation located at 801 Fallen Lane, Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, and the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Carson, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
H.R. 3096 would designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. Supervisory Special Agent Michael Resnick dedicated his 20 years of service with the FBI to protecting our nation. He demonstrated his dedication to protecting us all from terrorism as he continued to work while fighting pancreatic cancer. Sadly, he passed away in 2011. I think that it is more than fitting to name the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center after him. I support passage of this legislation. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3096, which designates the building occupied by the FBI in Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. As a former law enforcer, Mr. Speaker, I have a special appreciation for Supervisory Agent Resnick's 20-year FBI career. His service was highlighted by his role as a senior advisor in the White House, where he had a prominent role in leading the presidential review of watch-listing policies and procedures in the aftermath of the failed terrorist airplane bombing on December 25, 2009. Special Agent Resnick led the interagency review, which led to significant improvements in how the U.S. government screens and integrates intelligence on terrorist suspects. Agent Resnick was a well-respected public servant who passed away in 2011 as a result of pancreatic cancer. This designation is supported by the building owner and will stay with the building for as long as the FBI occupies this facility. The name designation of the FBI Terrorist Screening Center is a very fitting tribute to Supervisory Special Agent Resnick and his exemplary career with the FBI. Agent Resnick will be remembered for his dedication to developing the architecture of a government-wide watch listing of terrorism suspects and his tireless efforts to protect our fellow Americans from terrorism. I urge my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, to join me in supporting H.R. 3096. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve and yield back the balance of my time. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague and I thank the distinguished subcommittee chairman and of course, my colleague, the distinguished ranking member of the subcommittee, for their wonderful cooperation in this important bill. And by the way, I believe we're going to be joined by Mr. Resnick's widow and daughter very soon. Our colleague, Mr. Grimm, is going to be accompanying them here to the House. This legislation, as already indicated, will rename the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center, located in the 11th District of Virginia, in honor of Supervisor Special Agent Michael Resnick, who was instrumental in the creation of this very critical component of our national security network. I'm pleased to sponsor this bill along with my fellow Virginia colleagues Frank Wolf and Jim Moran and Mr. Richard Hanna of New York. Like so many of the brave men and women throughout our law enforcement community, Mike Resnick was seized by the mission of public service and gave every ounce to ensure the safety of those he was sworn to protect. In his more than 20 years in the Bureau, Mike held numerous tactical and supervisory roles, but his greatest contributions came in the field of counterterrorism at precisely the time we needed it. Following the attacks of 9/11, Mike Resnick was instrumental in laying the foundational policies and architecture for the screening and watch list system now administered by the Interagency Terrorist Screening Center. He was later assigned to the National Security Council, where one of his last assignments was promoting timely and effective information sharing among federal, state, and local enforcement partners. As a former local government leader myself, I can tell you how vital such collaboration is to the safety of our communities. Tragically, Mike Resnick was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in May of 2010, but he continued to staff his post through the physical and emotional strain of his treatments. CIA Director John Brennan, who at the time was the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, said Mike wanted to make sure everything was in order for those who would carry on with his work. He died February 2, 2011, at the age of 50. He's survived by his wife, Sarah Chamberlain, and their daughter, Jordan. It was one of my former colleagues, Amo Houghton of New York, who introduced Mike and Sarah by setting them up on a blind date. They were married here in Washington and enjoyed tennis, golf, travel, and when they could find the time, Mike played as hard as he worked. In fact, I'm told he was known to give some of our Republican colleagues a run for their money on the tennis court. He grew up in Bayside, Wisconsin, where his parents Sheldon and Ruth still reside. It will come as no surprise that Mike was an Eagle Scout growing up. He was a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison and DePaul University College of Law. Prior to his service with the FBI, he spent a brief period as prosecutor. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller said Mike was not motivated by recognition, but by a desire to get the job done, help others, and see those around him succeed. Though he shied away from the spotlight, renaming this building, in which he invested so much of himself, offers a fitting recognition and a lasting tribute to the memory of one of our nation's most dedicated public servants, who the President characterized as no less than an American hero. And I hope we remember that as we debate the issue of a shutdown of the federal government. Our federal government is filled with such noble public servants serving this country. Let me close by thanking again the Chairman and Ranking Member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee and the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management. And I urge passage of this fitting tribute, this legislation, this morning. And with that, I yield back to the distinguished ranking member.
Gentleman from Virginia yields back. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as a former mayor for 11 years, I had the opportunity to work with some great people in law enforcement, not only in our city government, but also those in the FBI. And I know all too well the difficult job that these men and women do to keep us safe, especially Mr. Resnick, who dedicated his life in fighting terrorism. I don't believe we need to look very far to see how vitally important it is as we try to keep Americans safe from terrorism right here at home. Mr. Resnick not only loved his job, but he loved his country. And I think it is very fitting that we honor all of those unsung heroes who go to work each day never expecting to see their name in a headline or in a story, but the men and women that go to work and make sure that we have the freedoms that we have here in America. Naming a courthouse is not a small thing. Naming a building is not a small thing as well. But just a dedication of a good American that did all he could, even during illness, Even during a time when most would quit and stop, he continued to work because of his love for his family and his country. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back his time. All time having been yielded back, the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3096? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker,
from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.
And when the House comes back, a number of votes, including finishing work on a bill authorizing a land swap between the federal government and Resolution Copper involving land tracts in Arizona. We will have live coverage of the House when they return. It was a week ago today that the House passed the continuing resolution funding the federal government through December the 15th and stripping out the funding